Hi, my name is Paul, and I'm with Career Services here at Western. I want to talk with you today about interviewing. Interviewing can cause us a lot of anxiety, nervousness. It's a very important part of the job search process, and we all want to do well in our interview. So we have some tips and best practices on how to ace that interview. Some of the things that we'll cover are how to prepare for your interview. We'll talk about some common questions that you might encounter in the interview, and then we'll also talk about how to answer those kinds of questions effectively. We know that there is anxiety involved, and so we've got a few tips on how to deal with that. We'll talk about how to follow up after the interview, and then we'll introduce you to Big Interview, a program that you have access to as a Western student that will help you practice for interviews. So as you are preparing for your interview, there are some things that you can do to help set yourself up to be successful. First of all, make sure that you research the company that you're interviewing with. Find out what they do, find out how their business works, but also find out what's important to them. What is their mission or their vision? What kinds of things do they value and what's important to them? Then you also want to make sure that you review the job description and become familiar with that so that you have in mind the things that they're looking for in an employee, and you can direct your answers to those things. You can think about where your skills and your strengths and your accomplishments match up with the things that they're looking for. You can even write out a list of your strengths and accomplishments and skills, your top qualifications, and then make sure that they're customized to the things that you're seeing in the job description. You can also think of and write down some different stories or examples from jobs that you've had, from projects that you've done in school, things that show off your skills and your qualifications. Make a list of those so that you have those in mind as you're thinking of answers to questions. You can also write out your answers to common questions. We'll go over what some of those questions are in just a moment, but writing out those answers while you're practicing makes sure that when those questions pop up in an interview, you're not thinking about that for the first time, but you already have put in a little practice on the kinds of things that you want to say. And then finally, make sure that you figure out the logistics and the technology. This can help you feel more comfortable and ready for that interview. If your interview is in person, make sure that you know where the business is located, how to get there, how long it will take you to get there so you can get there a little bit early and you're not feeling rushed. If your interview is virtual, practice with your technology. Practice with Zoom or whatever program they're going to be using for the interview. Make sure that if you have slides, if you have resources, that you've practiced with those and they're ready to go. I interviewed once where I had to give a presentation and I created slides for that. It was virtual and I didn't actually practice sharing the slides virtually before the interview. Had some issues with it during the interview and it wasn't going like I planned, and I got pretty anxious about that. Fortunately, the people interviewing me were very nice and they helped me out, and I still got that job, but it didn't feel great in the moment, and I wished that I had prepared and practiced with that kind of thing beforehand. So figure out all those logistical things so that you don't come across surprises like that when you interview. Let's talk a little bit about how to answer questions effectively in your interview. First of all, you don't want to just say that you have a skill. If you're answering a question, instead of saying that you are a person who's organized, share some details about what that looks like for you. Tell a story, give an example, show some evidence that those skills are true of you. Second, you want to make sure all throughout your interview that when you're answering questions, you're not talking about what's in it for you. Even though there are things that you're looking forward to with that potential job, things that you want to get out of it, during your interview, make sure you're focusing on what you are bringing to the table, the skills, the qualifications that you have that are going to help out that company. And then third, make sure that during your interview, you're keeping your answers positive. So don't talk poorly about a former employer or coworker. Make sure that you're staying positive about those kinds of things. And then also, we encourage you to not volunteer any information about weaknesses, things you feel like you could improve at, unless you're specifically asked about that. Otherwise, focus on the things that you're good at, the things that you feel like you're really going to be bringing to that company to help them out. So let's talk through a few of those common questions that come up often in interviews. And as we're talking about these, I want you to think through what your answers might be. So by far, the most common question that gets asked in an interview is, tell me about yourself. It's often the very first thing that they ask you in the interview. And it's a tough question to answer because it's hard to know what kind of information they're looking for. It's hard to know what angle you should take in answering that question. And do you share personal information? Do you not? The way that we encourage you to respond to this question is to maybe share a little bit of information about yourself. Like, I grew up in this town. I moved here X number of years ago. I got interested in this field because of this experience. And then after that, you want to quickly bring the focus back to your job, your skills, your qualifications that you're bringing. And so then you might say something like, I'm interested in this position because of this, and I feel like I would be an excellent choice because of qualifications X, Y, and Z. But with every question that you're answering, make sure that you're always bringing it back to reasons why they should hire you. Next is, why are you interested in this position? And again, this is a place where it's important that you're not talking about what you want to get out of the position, but tell them what it is that interests you about doing that kind of work. Tell them what it is that interests you in working for that company. Often in interviews, you will get asked, what is your greatest strength and what is your greatest weakness? The greatest strength one is a little bit easier to respond to. Just make sure you're picking something that you feel like you're good at. And if you can match that to something that they're looking for, that's even better. The greatest weakness question is a little bit tougher to answer because, like we mentioned, we don't want to be volunteering negative information about ourselves, and we don't want to make ourselves look bad. But the best way that we've found to answer this question is to genuinely respond with something you feel like you could get better at, something you could improve at. But then the very important part is that you follow that up by saying, and here's how I'm working on that. Here's how I'm trying to get better at that skill. Or here are the supports that I make sure are in place so that I can still do a great job. And then finally, another common question is, what do you know about our company? And so here it's just important that you've done some of that work beforehand. You know a bit about what they do and what's important to them, and you can share those things with them. You don't want to get caught off guard by that, but have some things that you can share about the company. Okay. In just a moment, we're going to talk to you about a style of questioning called behavioral interviewing. And in those, you're often asked to share a story or share an example of something that gives them an idea of how you have used particular skills. So often they'll say, tell me about a time that you blank. And when that happens, you can use this CAR method to make sure that you're giving them a really effective answer. So the C in CAR stands for context. So you just want to make sure that you're painting a picture of the situation for the interviewer, telling them what was going on and what was the issue or what was the situation. And then the A stands for action. This is where you talk about the action that you took to resolve the situation. Now, many people will stop right here, but if you add the R, the result, it's going to take your answer to the next level. If you can talk about how the action that you took made things better, how it improved things, how it resolved the situation, then that is showing the employer how the actions that you took benefited the company that you worked for. So let's take a look at some of those behavioral type questions. It's impossible to prepare for any behavioral question that they could ask, but here are some of the more common ones, and it can be really helpful as you're preparing for your interview to think through your answers and what they would be to these kinds of questions. First is, tell me about a time that you overcame a challenge. If you're asked something like that, remember, think about that CAR method. Tell them about the context of the situation. Tell them about the action that you took, and then share the result and how you were able to overcome that challenge. Another is, share about a time you experienced conflict with a coworker and how did you address the situation. Or give me an example of a time you went above and beyond and did more than you were asked. Or finally, describe a situation where you had to manage your time and complete a task. How did you do that? These kinds of questions are becoming much more common in interviews. It's very likely that you'll be asked this type of interview question. And so just make sure that you've thought through the types of answers that you want to give, or some of the stories that you would want to highlight for these kinds of situations. Okay, here are a few more tips to make sure that you're prepared to help you deal with some of that anxiety and nervousness that comes along with the interview process. So first of all, you want to make sure that you're dressed nicely, that you're well-groomed. And if your interview is virtual, make sure that you have a clean, neat background behind you, that there aren't going to be people popping in, loud noises, animals walking across your keyboard, that kind of thing. Next, when you're asked a question, there's kind of this unspoken pressure that we often feel to spit out an answer as soon as we possibly can so that we look decisive and prepared. But it's completely okay to take a moment to think, to pause, to ask them or say to them, that's a great question. Let me think about that for a moment. And then take a few seconds so that you're not just being reactive and responding with the first thing that pops into your mind, but you're making sure that you're giving them the best answer, the best example, the best story that you can come up with. We also encourage you to just be your authentic self. Don't succumb to that pressure to try to be something that you're not, or act in a way that's not natural for you. But be your authentic self and show them who you are and what you would bring to the table. And then finally, it's great to practice your speaking, to practice your eye contact, or not saying things like a lot. But at some point, just trust that you've put in that work, you've put in that practice, let that go, and just be yourself. We don't want you to be even more nervous in your interview because you're so focused on, am I saying too much? But just let it go, be yourself, do your best. Now, at the end of your interview, you will most likely be asked if you have any questions that you want to ask the employer. And when they do this, you definitely want to have at least one or two questions to ask. It doesn't look good if you say you have no questions. Then it seems like you're not as interested in the position. So when you do ask your questions, you can ask questions about what the job will be like, or what a typical day would look like on the job. You can ask things about what the company is like, what kind of employee tends to succeed here. You can ask about job duties and, what would be some of the priorities in the first 6 months for this person. If you feel like the employer is hesitant about you, if you're feeling like you're worried that they're not interested, You can always ask, do you have any concerns about my ability to do the job? I have a coworker who was interviewing and they felt that sense of, I feel like they have some hesitancies about me. And so they asked if they had any concerns. And the employer said, yeah, actually, we do. We're concerned that you don't have enough experience with this particular skill. And she was able to point them back to her resume and her job experience and show them that actually I do have quite a bit of experience with that skill from this job that I had previously. And that got rid of their hesitancy. In the end, she got that job. And so if you're feeling like the employer's on the fence about you, you can certainly ask that question. Now, this is a common question that we get from students who are going into interviews. Can you ask in the interview about the money? Can you ask about the salary? Is that okay? And there are a couple of views on this. The first is there are many people that say that asking about salary in an interview is a mistake, that you should not do it. They often feel like it makes it look like you only care about the money. It could hurt your chances to negotiate your salary later on in the process. There are also many people that say that asking about a salary is fine as long as you do it carefully. You don't want to only ask questions about money, but make sure that you balance it out with other questions about the company, about the job, that show that you're interested in other parts of the job as well. Some people feel that this can save time, finding out earlier on in the process if it's going to pay what you would require. People feel it's more equitable. And so if you want to do this, you would save that towards the end. And if you're feeling interest from the employer, you could ask them about the salary. But we would encourage you to, rather than saying something like, how much does this pay, to ask about the compensation, or to ask about a salary range. Now, in general, when you're asking questions at the end of the interview, if you're worried about not having any questions to ask or forgetting the questions that you had prepared, personally, I have brought a list of questions to interviews before and said, yeah, let me take a look at this list just to make sure that I don't forget any of the questions that I wanted to ask. And people have always been okay with that. So feel free to write down your questions and bring those along with you to the interview if you're worried about forgetting them, or you want to make sure that you've covered all the things that you're curious about. Now, after the interview, what do? You want to make sure to send a thank you note or a thank you email to the hiring team. And when you do that, mention something that you appreciated from the interview or something that you're excited about. That helps create more of that personal connection with the hiring team. If you aren't offered the position, ask them if there's someone that can give you feedback on how you did, and that may help you to be even more prepared for your next interview. And if you are offered the position, you should be prepared to negotiate your salary and benefits and that kind of thing. Many people are afraid to negotiate that salary, but employers are usually prepared to do that. And so we encourage you not to be afraid to negotiate that. It can be helpful when you're doing that to have done a little bit of research on, in my area, what is kind of an average wage or a salary range for a person in this kind of position. And then if they ask you about what kind of salary you're looking for, you can say, well, I know in our area, this is the typical range of salaries, and here's what I would be comfortable with. And that helps you to give them a strong answer and without pinning yourself down to just one figure. All right. And finally, we want to make sure that you know that as a Western student, you have access to Big Interview, which is the #1 mock interview program in the world. It's a website that Western subscribes to. And so you can create a free account with Big Interview. Some of these videos that we have on our website and in our job search handbook will help you get started. The idea is that you can practice your interview skills by watching videos of people asking interview questions, and then you can record your own answers in a video that you can watch back later so you can see how you did. You can review your answers and note things that you might want to improve. You can also send those videos to career services, to an instructor, to friends or family if you want to get feedback from other people. They have questions that are more general, commonly asked questions. They also have questions that are specific to different industries if you want to get a little more detailed in that. So that's something that you always have access to 24/7, anytime that you are wanting to prepare for your next interview. So if you have any questions about any of this, or if there's anything else that we can do to help you out with interviews, resumes, job or internship searches, anything like that, feel free to contact us in Career Services. We're located on the second floor of the Student Success Center, down at the end of the hall past the Learning Commons. You can email us, you can call us. We have all sorts of resources on our website too. So let us know what we can do to help. We are happy to be there for you wherever you're at in your job search process.